Salutations and greetings, Earthlings. Welcome. It is another episode of League Unlock. Mark and Eric here with you guys for a little bit of global power ranking action. Yes, it is that time of the week. We're going 20-1. It's a little bit different only because the LEC didn't play this week. They had it off, which makes it a little more complicated to do some of these rankings.
Just slightly, but it's more so about looking at the teams that played and waiting for them to have given us this opportunity. Give us the special mojo that you're going to show on the Rift to bounce yourself up the global power rankings.
And there's plenty of movement around. Some LPL teams only played one game this week, which again is hard to take that into account. But there is movement. There is teams making debuts, and we start 20-10 as always, which really the theme is 5-4 squads, because the first 5 teams on this list all are sporting a 5-4 record. You start with Misfits, who go down a couple of spots, even though they didn't play a game. It's just because some of these other squads are taking their spots, starting with LGD, who has one of the bigger drops of the week, go down to number 19. They lost to JDG. They beat OMG 2-1, but the real reason they're dropping is a 2-0 loss to Rogue Warriors. That's ugly.
Yeah, there's no way to make this sound any better than it is. Losing to Rogue Warriors at this point in the summer split, that is a really ugly blemish on the record for LGD. And this is the LGD squad wanting to see them succeed, wanting to see them push and be in that contention for one of those spots to go to Worlds for the LPL. A loss to Rogue Warriors, that's not the form that you need to be in.
Yeah, Rogue Warriors only have 2 wins on the split. 2 series wins. LGD contributing to half of those. Not the look you want to go for. Vici Gaming make their debut in the top 20, and it comes fresh off a loss to JDG, which is usually not how you make a debut, but it was a highly competitive series, except for Game 3. We'll throw that one out the window. But Vici had a legit chance to 2-0 JD Gaming, who were coming rolling into this set. They looked highly competitive, and you look earlier in the week where Vici took down FPX 2-1. They look like they could be one of these legit 5-4 squads to claim one of those final playoff spots.
And that's exciting because Vici has been one that, when Coma went into the organization and everyone looking at what's going to happen and how are they going to, increase their performance, there weren't a lot of answers really looking, yes, there's potential, things can get going, it's going to take some time. Having it click in already in summer and being a competitive team looking to, again, talking to LGD and their sights or maybe go into Worlds, this is a squad where you're talking about Vici keeping your sights a little bit shorter, set on playoffs and looking to do some damage in your region's playoffs. But absolutely, this is improvement from Vici, and to see them in the top 20 at all this year is a really great surprise.
Yeah, and, we had a bit of hype for them in spring. They fell off, but they had a 4-game win streak coming into that series loss to JDG. The Africa Freaks in the LCK, they're down a spot to number 17. They are the perennial gatekeepers of playoffs. 5-0 versus teams below them in the standings. 0-4 versus teams above them. But against those top 4 in the LCK, they have gotten absolutely smashed. It was no different this week. Damwon and Genji absolutely annihilating them on the Rift.
And that's the unfortunate thing for the Africa Freaks, is you put it completely right in how they have dominated, crushed anyone below them in the standings outside of the playoff picture. Africa Freaks are going to take you down. But when it comes down to taking on the top of the table, yeah, you're right. They haven't looked anywhere close to competitive with any of the squads really ranked kind of 4, 3, anything up that. You haven't been able to handle them at all. So this is really one of those situations where you head towards playoffs as the Africa Freaks. You're going to have to step it up because you haven't proved it once so far in the spring or summer so far against the top of the table in the LCK.
And they could still finish in that 5th seed. Just don't see a deep playoff run in the current form. A trio of LPL teams are next. RNG, they move up 3 spots. They 2-0'd EDG, but really it's more the 4 teams below them either not playing, in Misfits' case, or playing under the level we're expecting when it comes to Africa and LGD. Suning and World Elite quietly have 7-3 records now in the LPL. So yeah, they're a couple of spots ahead of RNG, and they are both looking pretty to make playoffs.
And you look at their schedules, they haven't had necessarily the easiest of schedules, not the hardest, of course, either, but right down the middle. And to be at where they are in the record right now, these are pretty legit squads, and what they're able to do certainly need to be keeping your eye on them as you move towards the later part of summer.
Yeah, Suning has RNG and Victory 5 left on the schedule, so nothing easy there. World Elite has BLG and LGD, so you could be talking about World Elite 9-3 closing out some of the action in spring, which would be a huge overperformance from what most people, myself, would have been expecting. Rogue and Invictus Gaming both stay put at 13-12. IG, they won 2-1 versus eStar. That's really not enough to move them up or down anywhere in the rankings, but the big drop, huge drop of the week, almost double digits, down 9 spots. We had to do it. The defending world champions, Fun Plus Phoenix. We had them so high up behind top esports. They lose 2-1 to Vici, throwing that third game that they absolutely should have won. They dropped that, and then they follow it up by getting absolutely smacked, ragdolled around the rift by top esports. It's a competitive league, and when you have a bad week like that, you drop big time.
Right. It's important to remember, though, yes, this is a big drop for FPX and where you would expect and the demand they should be as the talent that they've shown on the Rift. This is simply, as it puts, as bad a week as it could have possibly really gone for FPX. You flopped out in a match you absolutely should have been able to win. And then in your big show match, you didn't really get to show up and were pumped by the side of top esports. Look, this is still an FPX squad with enough time and enough talent to get it back together, to make that push back towards this top 5 of the world power rankings. They absolutely have that skill there. But it is time to take note and take stock in how bad this week was and how much that they have to suffer in the power rankings for it.
And just remember, there are 4 teams sitting with a 5-4 record now in the LPL. Only 2 of those 4 are currently going to be making playoffs. So yes, FPX still going to be one of those heavy favorites to do so because, I mean, they're FPX. We know that the talent is there, but and they have Rogue Warriors, OMG on the schedule still. They have JDG and EDG also, so they're still probably going to make playoffs, but you're not really talking about them as favorites heading into playoffs if it were to start in the next week or two.
No, you're not talking about that anymore. Need to pick up that momentum, that steam that they had been building up, the strong pop-off performances from Khan in the top side, doing B things. That's the type of action that you need to get back to this week if you want to make that climb back up the power rank.
Yeah, and I think Khan has still continued to perform pretty well. Sure, maybe he was less visible than you would have liked to have seen against top esports in that set, especially when he's playing things like Quinn. I think the bot lane has at times been a bit of an issue for FPX, but there's still no doubt that they can climb back into that top 10. It's really just speaks to the testament of how incredibly stacked the LPL is this split and this year, really. It's been one of the most stacked major regions, top to bottom, that we have seen in recent history, and that's why the LPL just keeps on winning world championships. And with that, FPX, just outside of the top 10, we move into the teams that are ahead of them. There's some familiar faces, some new climbs, some returns into the top 10, and we start with one of those familiar faces. G2, Perks is coming back for week 5. You still feel like they have to be just inside or just outside, I would accept, the top 10, even though they're not in their full form. They're only 5-4. Still expecting this team to be the best European team by the time the split comes to an end.
Absolutely is the expectation, and it should be for not only the players, the organization, but the fan base as well. That has to be what you're expecting from these players. Perks coming back. This is a big week to get him back in the lineup. And again, yeah, you can be, you know what, I want to take some time, give him some time back in the lineup. I don't think any of that needs to really be played around with the type of player that Perks is and how he can play on this lineup. I need to see results right away from G2, getting Perks back in the lineup. I want to see this trend, and this will be with Perks back in the lineup or not in the lineup. This is kind of that time of summer where you really want to see G2 start to turn it on, start to separate themselves from the rest of this pack. Even if this pack is of good and great teams in Europe, you need to see a level of play from G2 that's above it.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot of things you can account. The early struggles to sure all the, less practice, the personal issues that Perks has had, and even with Pinoy, you saw the potential, not even potential, it's been reached. Caps can still carry these games when you had the Kog'Maw mid, so still not really concerned about G2. Still a chance for them, I think, to climb all the way back into the top 5, which is where we were talking about them for the entirety of 2019 and even early on in 2020. Number 9, a spot ahead of them, and they moved down because of the loss to 100 Thieves, because it was in such dominant fashion. One loss is not enough to take Cloud9 out of the top 10. That's a little bit ridiculous for how dominant they have been, but we've kind of played them up or down a spot from week to week, depending on how the league around them, the world around them is looking. And the 100 Thieves loss, it hurts. They're still in the top 10, but they're number 9.
Yeah, it was a clear indication of maybe getting a bit ahead of yourself for Cloud9 as far as the draft and the composition compared to how easy an executed draft was for 100 Thieves on their side and other individual misplays. There's no way to put it other than, yes, this was a drop game for Cloud9, and it should hurt them in our power rankings as it has. But important to remember the body of their work that they've shown us week in, week out, all the way through, and what you can expect from them. Bouncing back is absolutely one of the big strengths that you can look for them. I have no doubts that this Cloud9 roster is going to be able to regroup, gather themselves up, and be as serious as they need to be on the Rift to take down the rest of the LCS.
I'm sure they were probably laughing after losing that 100 Thieves game. Whoa, we haven't got smashed this hard in like a year and a half, or a split and a half, guys. But listen, I'll keep arguing it regardless of how bad NA is. Cloud9 still deserves a spot in the top 10 at the very least when you're talking about these global power rankings, even if it is that number 9 spot, and even if it's their worst loss of 2020. Another team that moved down a couple is T1. They moved down to number 8. They were 6th last week, and sure, they 2-0'd the Prince squad, but they've looked pretty terrible for the most part. Not the same as APK did last split. And the loss to Team Dynamics is really the reason that they're dropping down. You saw they looked lost on the Rift against a middle tier team. It was just perplexing to see T1 playing at the level that they did in that series against Dynamics.
And not even just playing at the level that they were, the decision making that they are making is just perplexing on why and how, and at the times that they're making these choices. These are things that you would have and have seen from these players before, understand about the game and put into practice, and yet in the matchup, especially against Team Dynamics, it was nowhere to be found, and especially nowhere to be found when it mattered the most in that series. And that is disappointing, to say the least. Yes, the drafts are something that you can maybe talk about a little bit sometimes, but that absolutely is not the number one fault for why T1 is finding themselves slipping in our rankings.
Yeah, and much like FPX in the LPL, now you see T1 at 5-3. They're one loss less than the Afrika Freaks, but the top 3 just keep on climbing, and they're shooting themselves in the foot. And with the top half of the LCK being much better than we've seen in recent splits, I'm not nearly as confident in T1 just magically turning it on in playoffs and running it through the entire gauntlet.
Right. That said, if there is one team that can do that and will do that, we have seen that it is T1. But you're absolutely right in that this year, compared to previous years, and you look at how the gauntlet would have gone and how these type of things, this one might be the hardest ask of all if they have to run this all the way through the gauntlet. The type of players, the type of teams that they're going to be going up against, and especially more so, and yes, this can change as you get towards playoffs, but the form of these top 3 top squads that you've talked about, yeah, they haven't slipped up, haven't dropped a beat really all, except for Gen G when they're facing off against teams like DRX and things like that. But other than that, these top teams have not slipped up, and that is going to be something you really need to keep track of and keep in mind if you're thinking about T1 making this magical run through a gauntlet if they have to.
They're not doing it at the current power level that they're playing on. That's for sure. They're a spot behind Mad Lions, who stay put. G2, by the end of the split, we'll be talking about, I believe, being the strongest team in Europe. But for now, Mad Lions, I think, even though they dropped a game the last time they played, which seems a long time ago now, they're still staying put, looking like the strongest EU team 5 weeks in. And one of the bigger climbs of the week to just outside the top 5 is Gen G, a team, listen, we've seen them in the top 5 countless times here in 2020, but since that series lost to T1, they have looked dominant. 3 series in a row they've won. Every single one of them has been a 2-0 against, maybe not the most elite competition, Hanwha, Afrika, and Team Dynamics, but they absolutely obliterated Afrika on the Rift. And Gen G is the squad saying, please, somebody eliminate T1 before they get to us in playoffs. That's all they want.
That's going to be the biggest ask. Yes, we have seen them struggle against the other top of the table team, DRX, but at the same time, yeah, nothing compared to the historic struggles against the T1 organization and Faker himself in the mid lane.
But everyone else in the league,
Gen G,
they destroy.
Yeah, everyone other than DRX and T1, they've had the answer for them every single time. But the problem is that those aren't the people that have stood in between them and getting to the championship, earning that championship. And again, we can talk about Gen G, we can talk about the successes that they're having right now, but that's going to be the end of the day. That's going to be the question that they have to answer. And the question for them really that they're hoping is that they don't have to answer that question this summer.
Yeah, and I mean, for that to happen, they really probably have to finish top 2, which seems like a hard ask right now based on the current level of play from Damwon and Dragon X. So, I mean, you're basically banking on Afrika knocking out T1 in the first round. That's...
don't bank on that one.
Even in the current form that T1 is, I'd be pretty hard-pressed to see that happening in a best-of-3, let alone a best-of-5 series. But for now, Gen G, they've looked super clean across the board. BDD looks like he's well on track for his second straight MVP. He's 200 full points, so 2 full games ahead of second place in Barrel. And BDD looked great. He had the 5-man Echo stun today. He's clean.
Yeah, I tell you what, you haven't seen a lot of things dirtier than a 5-man Echo stun. It just feels like it stays forever. Like they just stepped in quicksand.
Yeah,
right
I love
there.
seeing him perform on things other than the Azir, because we've seen him carry so many team fights on the Azir, but anytime he's playing something else, it only gets me more excited. But for now, Gen G still just barely outside of that top 5 for this week. The top 5, Gen G, not in, but there's plenty of other LCK representation there this week, and we're talking about the head-to-head itself. Dragon X and Damwon, they faced off on the Rift. I would say the series lived up to the hype for the most part that they showed up. It had, Damwon looking like they should win the series and then not being able to close it out. Both of these teams absolutely have their weaknesses and things you can look at and say, I don't know if that's going to hold up on the international stage. But when they're both playing well, they're absolutely world class, and they're better than T1. We've seen the peak of T1, at least in this split, for sure. Damwon and Dragon X clearly looking like the 2 best teams in Korea right now.
Yeah, when you're talking about, maxing the throttle on the engine for these squads, absolutely, I think that DRX is at the very, very top of the table. The question is obviously, can you get to that very top speed, and can you keep that speed throughout the remaining games that you got? That is always the big one to ask for these squads, because you're right that they do have these little slip-ups, these mistakes that can be capitalized on by other teams. But the question is, when they're playing at their very best, it makes up and covers for those weaknesses elsewhere. So that absolutely is going to be the strength when these squads, and a squad like DRX specifically, is playing at their absolute peak. But when you mentioned with Damwon, you're right that they look like they were going to take it. Should be the ones taking this series. But it is just that little bit of a hiccup that still remains with Damwon from last year. And I still think you can chalk it up to the inexperience and how to handle yourself in certain moments and pressure. That is only something that you can learn from and develop through time and experience.
And you just compare what Damwon did to Dynamics versus how T1 lost to them. It was a totally different series. And even though Damwon has 1 full series loss more than Dragon X, they have less losses than them overall. That speaks to just how often they are 2-0ing all of these teams below them, and 2-0ing them in dominant fashion. That's why their average game time is sub 30 minutes. Damwon is absolutely legit. The top 3, it's dominated by the LPL. We knew this would happen. eventually. Third spot is JDG, who all they've done is rally off 7 series wins in a row. I think it's safe to say the defending LPL champs are back. Most recently, it was that 2-1 against Vici. It looked suspect the first 2 games. You thought they might be getting swept by them. But as is tradition for JDG, by the time the third game rolls around, they've fully hit their stride and they annihilated them.
Yeah, watching that one, I was getting a bit nervous because I was excited to come on this show and talk about, look, guys, we talked about them struggling at the beginning of summer, but they've gotten it back together, 7 win streak, and then start to see the game against Vici, and I'm thinking, oh man, no, they're gonna drop it here at the one time. I need them just to hold the line. They managed to get it. You can't give them too many points for managing to manage to steal that victory away from Vici. I think that was more about Vici underperforming in that game 3 especially. But yeah, you got to give credit to JDG getting there. And all it can say about the LPL is you got your spring champion at number 3 in our power rankings, and they're on a 7-game win streak. What does that say about how good the other 2 teams are in our power rankings from the LPL?
Yeah, and that alludes to the biggest climb of the week, which they only played 1 series this week, and it was the only one you really needed to talk about. Victory 5 versus Top Esports. The reason that they climbed so much, you could say, come on, JDG won 3 series. Victory 5 only won 1 of them. Well, Victory 5 did something that no other team in the world could do for the past 3 months, and that's take down TES. And it was a slobber knocker back and forth. We've already talked about how that series went, but that win alone is enough to climb them right up there and really cement V5 as legit. We've been waiting for them to go up against some of these top teams. They played a competitive series against FPX, couldn't quite get it done. They play a competitive series against TES and they get the dub. TES still deserve to be number 1, absolutely. 1 loss isn't enough, but V5, they're coming.
Yeah, and look, I got problems in that series with Top's draft in game 3 especially, but that doesn't take away from getting to that match, doing what you've done to this point. And again, we keep talking about it every time. Think about this. The last team we just talked about, JDG, spring champions. What was going on in spring for Victory 5? Oh yeah, 0-16, guys. This is an incredible run from the team to get to this form, to get to this level, and to answer the bell when it was asked of them against the undefeated Top Esports. I don't care what the draft looks like on that other side. All I ask is, did you do the job? Victory 5 did. PPGOD did. And this is where they stand in the power rankings at number 2.
We've been praising all split long, deservedly so, how good Top Esports has looked. They're absolutely the best team in the world, look like favorites for Worlds right now. All that being said, Victory 5 only has 3 total losses less than them in summer and has accounted for half of Top's losses single-handedly. Give them some credit.
And one of the best things also is, like, not only are the results there, if you're a fan, you're watching these games, they're exciting games. There's exciting champions being picked from this team. There are a lot of reasons I think people could fall in love with Victory 5 outside of just the underdog story from the spring split. Watch the games, look at them playing. Man, what an awesome
LoL is
story.
the only returning starter from that V5 roster in spring, and what blissful paradise it must be for him to go from that 0-16 to taking down the best team in the world. V5 is number 2. That's it today for League Unlocked. Mark and Eric here with you guys. As always, thanks for hanging out. We'll catch y'all on the flippity flop.